Hey, good afternoon. So, thanks very much for joining the session, and also thanks very much for all the speakers who have been speaking in the morning, and also just recently Elevate Bio. So, I think we heard a lot of good things about MES and MES of the future and different concepts of MES. So, I thought before I actually read the agenda, I also contribute my thoughts to what could be the next generation of MES. And then I was thinking, maybe I need a little help from a friend. So I asked Charlie to join the session together with me. Is that advancing? Ah, it is. All right. So I asked Charlie to join the session with me, because one of the things that we heard also quite often in all the recent presentations, regardless what kind of MES and what kind of implementation principle that we are talking about, there was a lot of references to level 1, level 2, and all these ISA 95 models. So this is obviously still relevant, and who could better talk about ISA 95 than Charlie Gifford, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we think could be the future of MES. And I would like to start a little bit talking about trends in pharmaceutical production. We heard that from Angelo also in the morning, and I didn't see his presentation before, but we obviously came to very similar conclusions. So what we are seeing as trends in pharmaceutical production that have an impact on what we are doing there and how we deliver MES or MES-like solutions, whatever we would like to call that in the future, is that we are coping with an increasing complexity in our production portfolio. So the times where factories were built for high volume blockbusters for one product or one family of product, I think that's over. We talked a lot about, well, the shift to one batch, one patient, but it's not only that. I mean, we're getting more and more precise with our medicine, so which means there's a lot of shift handover, a lot of product handover within production, a lot of different production modalities that also an information system like an MES needs to cope with. And the other thing is going into a very similar direction, but then specifically for cell and gene therapy, where we have really then one patient, one batch. And a thing that is required specifically also for cell and gene therapy, and that we have not been talking that much about this morning, is the tight integration of your manufacturing with your supply chain. Because you have that very rapid turnaround time from the patient into the manufacturing, from manufacturing back to the patient. And this is a couple of days that you have there. The other thing is, you can plan that. The patient may not be ready for treatment. So that means in regards of production schedule, you need to apply a lot of flexibility. And this is not only where the supply chain orchestration system needs to deal with, this is also where your manufacturing environment needs to deal with, and also consequently also your MES as well. Then one of the things, and this is leaving a little bit the business perspective, getting a little bit more into the tech perspective, but in previous conferences, and we had a Pharma MES in Berlin last year, so that it was, I think, the first one face-to-face after a long time. And also previously, before the pandemic kicked in, it started all that discussion about MES in the cloud. So the pharmaceutical industry, as we see that, is adopting more and more cloud solutions. Already quite heavily outside maybe the manufacturing space, but more and more also cloud solutions. We saw that presentation by Angelo this morning, is adapting cloud. So, and the other thing, and we heard that in various presentations, so Jeremy said, well, he didn't want to see any paper on the shop floor anymore. And I couldn't agree more to that. So this is something where we are striving for the last 20 years. So one of my jobs at Novartis was getting rid of paper in the shop floor. So, and this was in the early 2000s. I think I started at 2000 or 2001. And we are still not there, I have to say. I mean, not specifically Novartis, but as an industry. So, and this is not only about just getting rid of paper, but it is getting access to information. And information that is residing in paper, be it batch records or be it logbooks or whatsoever, this is not accessible. We can't use that data. We can't use that for continuous improvement. We can't use that for investigations. And if we're a CDMO, we can't use that in order to share production data maybe with our customers. So there is a trend that we are seeing all over in the industry to get rid of all of the paper, or if you say that in other words, to get access to data and information. All right, so with that, I wanted to set the scene a little bit. So what are the challenges, the key challenges? These are not the only ones that we are seeing in pharmaceutical production. And with that, I would like to hand over then to my friend Charlie.
Oh, thanks, Thomas. How did you
get to the other side because of the camera?
Okay. So I'll reiterate what Thomas said. Really glad to see you guys. Face to face, I've been zoomed out for 2 years. But so it's really interesting because, my career, I was one of the original founders of IIC 88 and 95 and matured it through and worked on it and applied it in 12 industries. And when I look at where the problem that we're trying to solve here, I've worked for 7 biotechs and 2 big pharmas. I was working with Thomas and a founder of the Open SCS for 3 years for developing the integration standard for the counterfeit drug regulations. So when I look at it, how do I advance here, Thomas?
The big one.
Oh, there you go. So I go back to when I was a rocket scientist working for the U.S. Navy out of school for 14 years. I blew stuff up. It was a validated environment. If you didn't do it exactly the way when you were making a warhead or a rocket, it would blow up. You don't want things to blow up. But it's the same thing. It was a validated process. But it was paper. I grew up with paper. I was very happy when I got my first Mac SE, when I wasn't typing and using a photocopier. I had hair back then. So as I went through the digitization maturity of the last 30 years, I compare to where you guys are, really where the electronics and semiconductor industry was 20 years ago. And I've worked and developed MESs in all these industries and watched them evolve and as R&D tools to accelerate tech transfer. So a lot of what you're going through now, I've actually seen in other industries occur. And so when I look at this chart from McKinsey, pharma is on a scale of 100 at 27. So, which is sort of interesting when you say 70% of the world still using paper, and you're right around that 30% mark. But it is a paper-laden, a complex regulatory world we live in. In order to get to that paperless world, you have to set up the infrastructure where you're collecting data, you're organizing and understanding the patterns of that data. And this is where it pays for itself when you're developing an MES or a batch execution recipe or workflow. You're engineering the happy path. You actually have to do FEMAs and understand the unhappy path and how you're going to handle that unhappy path. It's just not, so under engineering your workflow responses, when you have a deviation, is it a reaction or another workflow that you've optimized so that you can bring that recipe to its next engineered state? And so this is a knowledge that has to be developed in developing an MES of the next generation. Don't just engineer the happy path, engineer the workflows to support your MES to accelerate the development of your recipes. Then as you apply things to the assets, to each unit operation, you will be able to take this knowledge and apply the tools of what's called decision automation, AI, ML, AR, or predictive modeling. There's a group called the Open Group. Everyone's heard of business process mapping. language, BPML. They have what's called decision modeling notation, which a lot of industries are applying to their MESs now, where you understand the inputs and a decision model at each point in it based on not the happy path, but the unhappy path and how you're going to optimize and correct. Then you get into decision automation, where when you need to make a certain decision based on a certain situation and a workflow, that you are able to understand the model, the selection, the action, and the risk. A lot of times when you need to make a decision, you don't have enough time to have all the information, so you're making a decision based on the information you have and the time you have to make the decision. So there's a confidence level in that decision. Advanced MESs in, I'll say, other industries factor that as in its who's going to make the decision, a human or a computer. And that's where I'll take you next. So the whole idea here, I should have brought this up earlier, is we want to engineer the knowledge worker. The person doing the work, what decisions are they making? What decisions are you putting into an automated decision in a skid or a unit procedure? And when something abnormal happens, is the human making that decision that you've trained him to make, or are you assisting him in making that decision on that of what to do next around a deviation from that unhappy path? So when you go into decision automation, which is where MES will go, and you must understand the trust continuum. So at what point do you let a machine make the unambiguous objective decision? There's a lot of engineering that has to go into a machine or a skid making the decision instead of the human. Or at what point do you give the human, a trained human, the decision support from data, and you present him with the alternatives to make the decision at that point in the workflow? The world we live in paper is we train a human to actually, and we live with the human is the human computer. He stabilizes the ambiguity because of his training and his experience. Procedurally, we trust the human to produce a high quality product. And they do a pretty good job, but it's all based on training. But as we move to the MES of the future, it has to work through a decision hierarchy between level 2 and level 3, which we'll get into shortly. This is what you're talking about here is the ambiguity tolerance. We tolerate a high amount of ambiguity in a paper process because we train the human to deal with it. When we get to an automated world, we have to trust the machine. We have to. And the speed, though, is really slow with paper, but when we have machines and AI and decision and digital twins helping us, we'll have a much faster process, not just for the unhappy path, but how we deal with R&D and the movement through innovation to that stabilized, validated process that we have to take into a GMP environment. So these are the two predominant Industry 4.0 models, RAMI from Platform Industry 4.0 and the Industrial Internet Reference Architecture. So I could speak for an hour on these, but I got 1 minute. So, but this deals with the life cycle and of the business from the asset to the business, very ISA 95 as its foundation, and then across the actual plant model here. So these are the functional layers. These are the plant models in it. But I've come to really like the IIC model for representing Industry 4.0 because it deals with what I have to design to as a system. I have to design trustworthiness into my system in the form of, and I had 1 minute to do that. So, so what IIC does is that they say your characteristics for a system quality, as a system quality measure for trustworthiness, deals with reliance, reliability, security, privacy, and safety. So they define these as requirements for and many of these are non-functional requirements, that if you move things to the cloud versus a client-server architecture, you still have to address these non-functional requirements in order to have a good set of operation management or MES systems. The one they left off, which is my bread and butter, people pay me to help deal with, is the data integrity. And I call this the language variable. If I have to make anything in any plant, there are 50 to 100 systems. Some of them are paper. An Excel sheet is still a system that you have to use to make it. Every one of those has metadata. And if they all don't agree, that means they're all speaking 50 different languages that you have to reconcile in an analytic report or within a batch record or an investigation of a deviation. This slows down the process and makes the movement, acceleration through R&D to a BLA or a GMP product much slower. If I have to rewrite the recipe and the rule set because of the researcher calling an object or process something different than what they're going to call it in stage 1 or stage 2 or then GMP, you rewrite the recipe 3 or 4 times in that life cycle. That's 2 or 3 years of added characterization you have to go through, going from something discovered in the lab to a GMP process. The MES needs a common language to accelerate R&D and tech transfer. So this is, to Thomas's theme here, as we move to cloud-based systems, we still have to handle, how do I go backwards? There we go. You still have to handle data governance. And this is an ignored topic. That's why I brought it up when Thomas and I were talking about what we're going to talk about. It's like, let's talk about data governance. So you actually have to care about data architecture and the management of architecture in order to have that integration between systems and clean data when you aggregate information out of those systems into knowledge management systems and analytics. You have to have data quality. I'm really bad with these buttons. You have to have data quality management and have good specifications around it and protocols around data quality management. This is usually a reaction for people to get to that point. They have to actually figure out they have bad data or corrupting data in aggregation and exchanges before they actually start doing data quality management. And then metadata management, so that you actually understand and do namespace management and namespace registries between systems, so that if I look across any manufacturer in here, I guarantee you I can go pick up 5 documents and find that you have 5 words for one object, or the worst case scenarios where you're using 1 word for 3 objects, and this creates bad data in aggregation and slows down investigation and development. So these things are what plague MESs and they're basically their success. Then we have, and this leads to my last topic, why it's a different color, is process master data management, and I am the zealot when it comes to this. So this is what I believe is missing and needs to be part of any architecture at the process level. Speak one language across your systems, you'll accelerate your IDEs to BLAs much faster. So this is the activity model from ISA 95. And this is where people get a lot confused because they go level 3 this, or level 4 that, or level 2 this, level 2 that. And they think they're systems. These are functions. You can't make anything without defining resources, defining your workflows, and having those definitions executed in a recipe or a workflow. But you schedule this recipe, you dispatch it based on available resource, and you execute it. And these are the backside apps. This is your EBR right there. All right? So, so when we look at that, to do good decision interaction, this is what happens now at level 2. You have the decision making occurring in the control and safety and alarm management and monitoring. And so this is where the world's going. You have a cloud and you have a smart device. How do they work together to execute those functions to make something? These interactions in the way that things are moving in the future are events. Event-driven architectures and event data exchanges. Stop doing request response data exchanges. Set up event-driven data exchanges and event-driven exception. The gentleman were speaking about exception-based processing. And this is what you have to do. So, and then smart analytics are in the cloud. And then we're integrating we're integrating the whole MES into the supply chain. And then I want to speak to this real quick. All this is decision making at level 2 that is now feeding decisions into level 3 in the MES. So you find that already happening with the way skids are working with MESs today in this industry, but the data is not clean that's shared between them. So there's standards that address this, which I'll skip. But just to finish up my thoughts, I hope I didn't ramble too fast, but the next generation MES manufacturing execution system has to support trustworthy decision automation. You're going to trust the system and trust equipment to make decisions that are now made by humans. And there is a progression to do that. The next generation MES is the tool to help accelerate innovation and GCP to GMP tech transfer, as well as time to market. The next generation MES is a big part of Industry 4.0 as the whole concept of what's called a supply network, because it collects knowledge and provides that knowledge into planning, into forecasting, into the supply chain. It is the hub for the plant's knowledge into those other areas. Decision automation, I've rambled about that. You have to set up this trust continuum with those non-functional requirements, no matter whether it's in the cloud or in a local app. And the next generation architecture, it is, to me, the foundation for Industry 4.0, because it is the hub and the connection into the whole network. And then my last two thoughts there were around that you're pushing things. You're having a lot more decisions made by a machine or a human at that smart device that supports the workflows within the MES. And they coordinate with each other. And how cleanly and well they do that, not just in the happy path, but the unhappy path, is what is really going to allow the MES of this future to make the plant make money. I'll leave it at that. All right?
All right.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Charlie. So, trustworthy decision. Keep that in mind, what Charlie was saying. So that's one important when we're talking about also expectations for the pharma MES of the future. So just a very quick reminder, what is high-level an MES doing? At the end of the day, what we are expecting from an MES is that we are collecting all the data that are relevant in order to put in an electronic batch record. So a couple of other things, but this is what we are usually expecting when we are talking about the pharma MES. And in order to build this, to get that as build record, we need to trust the information that we are collecting for that batch record. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Whatever the architecture is, looking at traditional architecture, cloud-based architecture, whatsoever. So, the other thing is, in order to get all to that data, and I believe, and we strongly believe, that the pharma factory of the future is a fully integrated factory, and MES is one element probably of that. So within the four wheels of the factory, we have an manufacturing operations management system. So let's get away a little bit from that MES, because with MES we're always thinking about, well, that monolithic system that we are knowing today. And it could be the one of the future, it could be not the one of the future. I don't care what the architecture, the system architecture is behind it. The data architecture, I think this is what is important. But then we also, and this is what we are missing very, very often, and this is coming with cell and gene therapy, evidently quite heavily up, and I talked about that earlier, that integration of manufacturing with the supply chain. So we need to have a tight integration of the upstream and the downstream supply chain, tightly connected with our manufacturing space. And then whatever that is called, that supply chain orchestration platform, I mean, that could reside somewhere in an ERP system, but it could be also something else. I mean, we know also cloud-based supply chain orchestration systems that are outside of an ERP. But we need to have that in order to connect whatever manufacturing space we have here. And the other thing is, Charlie also alluded a little bit on that, is, well, how do we get the data from development into manufacturing, but also from manufacturing into, for example, a CDMO? And then the CDMO is actually becoming this one here, right? So, and this is what we're seeing in the future, that we need to have that full integration from a manufacturing. I'm a manufacturing guy for the last 30 years. So from a manufacturing perspective, that we have that full integration vertically as well as horizontally on the various levels. And this is where we see the place also of an MES, where is now that, whatever, of an MES in the future. Here, and that orchestrating that manufacturing operation management, but as I said, tightly integrated with all the other whatever systems and things that we have there. So when we are saying the pharma factory of the future is integrated, and Charlie also talked about that, we are talking about not systems, we are talking about functionalities, or we are talking about actions, or we are talking about services. I mean, this is talking about a service architecture where we have various services that are relevant in order to produce a product within the four walls of our manufacturing. So that is, of course, the acquisition of process and product data. That is building the electronic batch record. This is planning, is included, advanced analytics. But also, I mean, one of the things that also comes with that and should come with that is real-time batch release. And we have not been talking specifically about that. But again, that needs another integration. And this is the integration with all our quality control data. Yeah? So, and this is how we see that at the end of the day, when we're talking about the factory of the future and the role that MES is going to play in that, we are talking about the platform that provides all these kind of services. So will we call that an MES? Will we call that something else? To be honest, I don't know about you. We have not been talking specifically about this, but I don't care how it is called. But this is what we need as an architecture from a data governance point of view in the future, right? So, but if you look into what we have here as services, and remember what Charlie presented there as the ISO 95 model, this is what you all find in ISO 95. So it's about the principle of MES. So the factory of the future is digital. I mean, we heard that several times, and I think there is no doubt about that. And the MES is the core of that. We still need an MES. We need MES as a concept, not necessarily as that monolithic system that we will find on our premises here. All right, so that was a little bit quick at the end. We would like to take some questions, but following us is also the fishbowl sessions. So we're gonna, in that fishbowl session, we're gonna share more of these thoughts. We're gonna discuss about these thoughts. And the fishbowl session is not just a panel discussion where there are 3 or 4 panelists here. I mean, this is invitation to everybody to join us in the fishbowl and discuss with us.
Swim around.
All right, any questions?
Thank you, Thomas, Charlie.
It was a pleasure to be on stage with you.
Oh, well, you too.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you for the presentation. Charlie, this is kind of more question directed to you in terms of that automation trustworthy decision. in comparison to the other industries, ours being a little bit farther behind, are there different blockers or things in our way to get us there when compared to the other industries, and what kind of solutions are being thought about?
So Boeing has a saying that it's 80% cultural and 20% technical, and it applies very much in this situation. So when I've done transfer, I do what's called a manufacturing digital transformation assessment. I've done it for a couple of companies large companies in this industry, but I've done it across GE aircraft engines and other places like that. And it doesn't matter. When I go into R&D and I work with very smart physicists and people, they like their tools. And so then they invent something, and then the pilot plant side has to take what they've given them in some kind of tech transfer and then put it into a characterization and scaling set of studies. And then the manufacturing people have to reconfigure and characterize that again. So other industries have worked to push back an ISA 88 structure, and a 95 structure, whatever, or I was going to mention in semiconductor, why they can contract out the making of basically any electronic to any CMO is because of what happened with Symatech in the 90s. The Big Ten got together and said, this is the manufacturing and supply chain model. We're going to, and now you can walk into any Intel or AMD or Flextronics plant worldwide, and I can also take and the equipment naming convention, the attribute set is the same across this. So if I want to go to a CMO, I actually hand them a recipe or a workflow with that data model, and they go and make it. When Gillette was purchased / merged with Procter & Gamble, both used ISA 88 recipes to basically manufacture their various CPG products. Within 1 year, a Procter & Gamble plant went from making 30 products to making 110 products within 12 months. I worked in beer plants when Miller and Coors took their 8 plants, 2 Coors plants and 6 Miller brewing plants, and said, we're going to make all of our products in all 8 plants. They were able to do that in 12 months because they were all ISA 88 based recipes. So they all speak the same language. And so if you want, so that is a cultural problem that a lot of other industries have overcome at some point in their life cycle.
Just as a quick follow-up, I forget some of the other industries were on that timeline in one of the earlier slides, but some of those industries are heavily regulated, kind of incomparable to the biotech pharma industry.
Especially aviation.
Right. Are there things that were hard to get past, especially with biotech, whether it's internal, external regulation or working across the globe or just working with quality individuals within our, business units, that's been easier to get around? Because I, kind of foresee that line, if you will, of having more trustworthy automation going up, making things easier, but the trustworthiness, or trying to convince quality and regulations that it's a good idea.
It's a business case, all right? So, and that in the 2 or 3 companies or 3 companies I've done this for, I literally have to show them the disparate language and the cost of it, and I've done ROI for it. So when I went through aircraft engines, and I did that 15 years ago, my team saved them $1 billion. All right, and we quantified it tangibly in a believable form. Until you quantify the loss and you show that to the researcher that you're doing great work, but your product won't be to market for 10 years. If you do X, Y, and Z, it'll be there in 3 to 5. And you have to actually show them a tangible explanation of how what they're doing, and even the upstream phase 1 and 2 work breaks down and adds years to something that could be done in 3 to 5 years. It has to be made in a business case and a tangible explanation.
Okay, thank you.